All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jacob Bentliff with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, Manager of Economic Recovery Initiatives, and I'm really pleased to see everyone who's able to join us this morning. On the city side, I'm joined by Lily Langlois at the Planning Department, as well as Dylan Hamilton at Planning, and my colleague here at OEWD, Jonathan Cherry. We also have a couple of other experts from the Planning Department. Xinyu Liang and Shannon Ferguson are also joining us if they can be helpful with any specific questions that may come up. Lily or Dylan, are you able to bring up the slides? Great. Thank you. Okay, why don't we go on to the third slide? Just a little bit of housekeeping for everyone. As you know, from the alert you got, this meeting is being recorded. We are going to post the recording on the RFI webpage. We are also going to be writing up the questions and answers that are received and discussed today, and those will also be going up on the RFI page. We're going to ask everyone to please remain on mute until we've gone through the presentation and then open it up for questions. And you are welcome to put your question in the chat once we have concluded the presentation, or raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can just ask your question as well. Either one works. So let me give a little bit of context before we dive into the specifics of the RFI. Thank you. This is one effort that's coming out of the mayor's roadmap to downtown San Francisco's future. This is a set of strategies that she laid out in February as part of her State of the City address. Covers a whole lot of work, everything from making sure that our streets and environment downtown are clean, safe, and inviting, doing good old-fashioned economic development work to make sure we are attracting a diverse range of businesses. That includes adjustments to our business tax policy as well to be more competitive, to help office businesses move into downtown. Number 3 on here is really where this RFI falls under. This is a series of efforts to facilitate new uses and flexibility in our buildings downtown. One big piece of that is some legislation that Lily will be discussing in a moment that really tries to clear the way for these projects in terms of planning and building code issues. Today is really a follow-up step on that to engage with you all who may own properties or be in the development community, who are interested in taking the next steps and figuring out what else we can do to be helpful from the city side to facilitate these kind of projects. So again, thank you for your interest. We also, just to round this out, have a number of efforts that are around helping businesses start and grow. This includes efforts at permit streamlining and inspection streamlining to make it easier for ground floor tenants to get into those vacant spaces. It includes our Vacant to Vibrant program, which is matching artists and entrepreneurs with vacant ground floor spaces. If that is something that you're interested in, I will put the link to that in the chat. We're always looking for more folks with vacancies who are interested in filling those up through this program. I'll put that there in a moment. You're welcome to follow up with me on that. We have a number of efforts around workforce development. This area also includes our housing policies to meet our housing element goals of adding 82,000 units over the next 8 years so that our workforce can actually get to work in San Francisco. We also have a lot of focus on arts and culture, nightlife, entertainment, making sure there are other reasons to come downtown other than just going to the office, because we all know the reality of return to office right now. It also really includes leaning into our public spaces, our public realm, and our transportation infrastructure. We look at all this as infrastructure that the city has invested in throughout its entire history that we simply are not going to walk away from in downtown. And so part of this RFI conversation of bringing more housing to downtown is to make sure that we're taking advantage of those assets so that downtown can continue to be the economic engine of the city. And finally, in all of this, we are really trying to focus on the messaging and the narrative. As you know, the media is not doing us a whole lot of favors with a very negative narrative that is out there. That's fine. People are going to do what they're going to do, but we all know we have a lot to offer in San Francisco. And so part of all these efforts is making sure that we are getting telling the story of what is positive, what is happening in San Francisco, how we are adapting to this new reality we have post-COVID, and certainly commercial to residential conversions is a part of that. You're welcome to go and look at more of this here at sf.gov/downtown roadmap. I'll put that in the chat as well. That whole set of strategies and initiatives is very much a living document and is being updated regularly. Also, just wanted to touch on the reality that this is not new. This has been done before. People have converted commercial spaces into residential throughout the country, and I'm sure around the world as well. We have a number of examples here. In some cases, such as Calgary, there was a significant amount of investment from the Canadian federal government actually to make that possible, to subsidize those. And other places like Alexandria, Virginia, and other locations, this just simply happened due to market demand. That was the case at 100 Van Ness here in San Francisco about a decade ago, former AAA office building that was mostly vacant. And as you can see down there in the bottom left of the screen, they did a fabulous job, completely reskinned the building, and that was done at a time where we had lower inclusionary rates, but no, there wasn't a specific subsidy for that project. That was simply the market was there, and they were able to accomplish that on that building. So, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lily to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the recent legislation that has lifted a number of barriers and process issues around these conversions. So, Lily, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks so much, Jacob. So I wanted to quickly talk through this legislation that was approved on July 5th. This legislation was introduced by Mayor Breed and President Peskin, and among other things will help to facilitate adaptive reuse of commercial buildings. This legislation is now in effect, and so this would be sort of our baseline as we're reviewing these types of projects. And as indicated in the RFI, projects, if you're converting to residential, are welcome to use this. If you're converting to another type of non-residential use, another commercial use, these provisions would not be applicable. So quickly, this legislation creates a new section in our planning code. It establishes the commercial to residential adaptive reuse program, and we define this as a change of use from a non-residential use other than a hotel to a residential use. And projects which meet the eligibility criteria, which I'll talk through in a second, are able to receive a number of zoning waivers or modifications. Applications have to be submitted by December of 2028. And in parallel, we're working closely with Fire and DBI to explore also the building code issues related to adaptive reuse, and expect to produce an administrative bulletin that will guide that process, hopefully later this year. So in terms of eligibility, in order to apply for this program, you have to be located in either a C3 zoning district, which is the dark red on this map, or a C2 zoning district, which is the lighter pink. C2 districts north of Townsend Street. So mostly our downtown and the areas directly north of downtown. Project also cannot seek approval under the state density bonus program. So those are the two important eligibility criteria. If you meet this criteria, you're able to seek a number of waivers from the planning code. In addition, projects can add up to a third additional volume to the building, and that additional space is also eligible for these waivers. So these waivers include things like lot coverage, open space, dwelling unit mix, exposure, bike parking, live work, and ILOs would be permitted uses in an adaptive reuse project. And important in this in terms of process is also waives a Planning Commission Section 309 hearing. So these waivers generally make sense for a building that already exists, and the intent here is to really help facilitate the reuse of that existing structure. So the way that this process would work is an applicant files a building permit. That permit is then routed to the planning department. We anticipate about a 3-month review process, which includes also our CEQA analysis. That I'll just make a note that assumes that there's not an expansion or a historic building. And again, the quality and completeness of the application really helps to streamline planning's review of that project. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dylan to talk more specifically about the RFI, but just wanted to give a little bit update on this legislation so that you are all aware of it and can think about ways to take advantage of it for new projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Lily. So I imagine that most people here are here because they are interested in or have questions about the RFI that we issued in June. So I'll get into the basics of that and hopefully share some useful information that can inform Q&A a little bit later. So the goals for the RFI, as Jacob mentioned earlier, commercial to residential conversions or commercial to other commercial conversions are not new. And adaptive reuse provides a number of benefits to downtown San Francisco as well as the city as a whole. Some of these benefits are generating much needed housing units, activating the ground floor, preserving historic building facades, or in the case of commercial to commercial, possibly diversifying the downtown economy. So that's one bucket of the goals. The other being that, obviously all buildings are different. And so even though we have some precedents that Jacob shared earlier, and we've been thinking about this and looking into this, we are interested in responses that provide clear approaches to how to make adaptive reuse of commercial buildings downtown more feasible. So we know that the market can vary a lot, even within a small geographic area. And we're looking for responses that have a really clear, specific approach to the conversion process. And Lily shared earlier a quite similar slide. So eligibility for the RFI is limited to projects that are located in a C3 zoning district or a C2 zoning district that's east of Franklin and north of Townsend. So the projects can convert from commercial uses to housing or other uses. And projects that convert to residential uses can use planning section 210.5, which Lily shared earlier. And projects that convert to other uses, other commercial uses, are not eligible for 210.5. And eligible projects can be at any stage of the development process. So if you have financing secured, if you're in the very early stages of site selection, we would still be interested in receiving and reviewing the project. The timeline, quick overview of the timeline. The city issued the RFI in June, about a month ago on June 22nd. And the deadline for submission of written questions about the RFI was on July 12th. And we posted the answers to that initial round of questions a few days ago on July 17th. Today, obviously, is the optional online information session with the deadline for responses coming on August 4th. We will have an opportunity for rolling submissions to be accepted after this date if capacity allows. So that'll be kind of TBD. And then by the end of September is when the city estimates it will complete review of all the responses and initiate follow-up with certain applicants. And again, this part of the schedule is contingent and may be adjusted on the number of responses that we receive. Possible forms of assistance and involvement. The bottom line is that we want to hear from you all as the project sponsors what you need to bring your project to fruition. We've identified some potential ways the city could support these projects, which are listed here in the two buckets of either regulatory or financial assistance. Includes planning code waivers, different kinds of tax incentives or direct financial assistance from the city or the state. But we're most interested in hearing from you all very specifically what it is that you need, things that are listed on here or things that are not listed on here. Content of responses. So there's a lot of different pieces of information that will be included in the responses that are listed on here. Just to elaborate on a few of the key ones, the contact information. That's for people who are involved with the project who can be contacted by OEWD and planning staff. So that's item number 1 on your screen that you can see. Relevant experience from the project team. It doesn't need to be comprehensive, but it should include notable projects, especially ones that have similarities to the project that you're proposing. So either similar in scale or scope. That's item number 3 on the slide. And item number 7, just to elaborate on that a little bit, the financial feasibility. What we'd like to be included in this, any cost estimation that's already been conducted. If the project is going to use federal, state, or local funding like tax credits. For this section, you can also provide a separate file titled proprietary data for anything that you in good faith believe to be a trade secret. So submittal format, we're asking all respondents to provide their applications in a single PDF file. Proprietary information, as I noted earlier, should be clearly marked and can be submitted in a separate file. If the file exceeds the size, then you can share a file link, and that would be acceptable. And just to reiterate, the final deadline is August 4th, with rolling submissions to be accepted afterwards if capacity allows. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Jonathan, who will facilitate the question and answer section.
Okay, we have plenty of time. Hi, everyone. Jonathan Cherry with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. As I think Jacob mentioned earlier, there are 2 ways. If you have questions, you can raise your hand, which I believe is accessed through the reactions button at the bottom of the screen, or you can put questions in the Q&A directly, and we will try to alternate between those 2. So I see one hand up, Brian McNeil, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for taking the time. So I just want to understand the purpose of the RFI. So we know now that most projects don't pencil from a financial perspective, given interest rates and things of that nature. Is the goal to submit a prospective project and then y'all are going to synthesize the feedback and then come back with additional incentives? Or maybe explain to me what happens after the RFI. I mean, we need to get developers incentives to actually convert some of these.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I mean, I think generally that's right. I think we know that in most cases currently, these projects are financially not penciling. I think what we don't know is the volume of projects. I think what we don't want to do as a city is set up some incentive program and then find out that it was, like not going to actually be enough to make projects happen. So I think the big goal for this RFI is to learn about specific projects and understand what those specific projects need, which may be some form of financial incentives that the Board of Supervisors would need to approve, or it may be something other than financial incentives. But yes, that's one goal for us, is to understand specifically what is needed.
Got it. That's helpful. And I've spoken to quite a few developers. So to the extent that it's helpful, we've got a list of what would move needles and potential projects. So depending on what the feedback looks like, please let me know if you'd like me to share those, and we can at least start building a catalog.
Okay, thank you, Ryan, for the question and the offer. Lydia Tan, please go ahead.
Jonathan, so just to follow on to Ryan's question. So if the particular project, particular developer submits to the RFI and they're on a fairly fast time frame, I mean, is the idea to try to address each one of the issues separately, or is it the idea to gather information and create a larger policy that might take longer? Just trying to understand time frame.
I mean, we're interested in both, and I might ask my colleague Lily also to jump that. We are interested both in whether there is a demand for citywide policies or programs, and also how we can help individual projects that may already be underway. So I think it's both of those things. So I mean, I think that's why we asked for project schedule information, is to help understand like where these projects are in that life cycle.
Thanks.
I would also add that, we could, depending on what the ask is, we can make, individual changes that change the planning code or change other changes to legislation. That obviously takes a little bit of time. The other option, the other potential route is to go through sort of a development agreement process where we sort of can bundle, the support from the city, the other legislative changes all together, and that becomes one package and sort of one legislative process. So the implementation, I think we're really flexible to figure out sort of what is the quickest path, for the project. The city is really eager to see a handful of these projects so that we can really understand, how we can move the needle in terms of activation and also adding housing.
And just to add, I mean, I think we think there may be some projects out there that may not need changes in, any changes to happen. They may just be interested in taking advantage of Mills Act incentives or other programs that already exist and may just need assistance doing that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lydia. Are there any other? Okay, Alex, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, thanks for taking some time. Is the ultimate goal here to allow projects to kind of run almost on a by right basis moving forward, or is the idea that there will always be sort of an application process that needs to be reviewed by sort of the planning commission? Just in terms of like feasibility of like a large volume of projects down the line, given there's so much vacancy. I would think, it might be a good idea to be able to just run projects through on a by right basis. So is that the ultimate goal, or is there always going to be sort of an application process involved?
I can take a first pass. I think the answer is both. So the goal of this legislation was to make adaptive reuse to residential largely by right. So looking at sort of all of the barriers, all of the planning code barriers that we've seen for other projects, most of those planning code requirements have been waived. Unfortunately, in San Francisco and California, the project isn't necessarily a by right project because we have to do CEQA analysis related to it. So that involves, filing an application. It also involves, some review from our department and the building department. But we're trying to tighten this review process as quickly as possible. We've removed the requirement to have a planning commission hearing so that essentially you have some certainty to know that the use and the project is allowed and permitted. There is just a little bit of lead time that has to happen largely to around the CEQA analysis.
And I'll just add to that obviously, yes, the goal of the legislation was to deal with what we can deal with locally. CEQA is obviously, in the state's purview, but we have begun conversations. There is some interest at the state level from Office of Planning and Research and others to take a look at that and see what we could do specifically to conversion projects. So that is another one of these things where as much specificity as you can provide with the projects that you have in mind for this RFI as to which components of CEQA, is it preservation? Is it something else? That it's helpful for us to really get a very specific list of those things so that we can also be better educated when we're talking with, in this example, with state partners about what needs to change.
Understood, thanks.
Okay, Mona Monet, apologies for the pronunciation. Please go ahead.
Hi, yes. I have a question about the timeline to secure funding. Do we need to have a plan for securing funding by the time we submit our proposal? Or do we already have to have funding secured by the time we submit our proposal?
Thank you, great question. For purposes of this RFI, projects can be at any stage of planning, design, or development, so you do not have to have secured funding. You could be at. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. All right, and I'll just mention that in the chat, there are a few resources, links directly to the recently changed planning code amendments, the Mills Act program, Vacant to Vibrant, other things. So folks should definitely refer to the chat for those. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, hi guys. One more here. What is the overarching affordability requirements that are going to be overlaid upon these projects in the C2 and C3 districts?
So Lily, do you want to take that?
So we would use, as a baseline, we would use the law of the day. So the inclusionary changes to the city's inclusionary housing program are going through the legislative process right now. They were at the Planning Commission last week and they'll be at the board, I believe, next week. So assuming that those are changed, we would take that as the baseline. And then if you're seeking a further reduction from that, that would be something that you would specify in your application.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think for the purposes of this exercise, while obviously that legislation is still pending, it is the result of a deal that has been struck and has been advised by the Inclusionary Technical Advisory Committee. So we feel fairly confident that this is going to be the structure for inclusionary for the next few years as spelled out there. So when you're looking at project feasibility and trying to identify what additional needs you may have, I think it would be helpful if you could factor in the lower inclusionary rate and also the changes to the impact fee calculations that are included in that. When you look at this, it may be prudent to look at that as kind of an alternative, because since, of course, the legislation is not finally passed, but I wouldn't want to be in a situation where we're looking at a lot of information that's reflecting kind of what will by then be really the old inclusionary regime. And I'm sure we're happy to help answer questions about what the details are of inclusionary. I think probably as a follow-up outside of this, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, and I'll mention that, if you do think of a question right after this call or in the next day or so, we are going to be compiling all the questions that were asked here. We will post answers online on the RFI webpage. And if you have a question that you think of right after this call, please go ahead and email that in and we will include an answer to that at the same time. Also, if you have a project specific question about what needs to go in the submittal as you're preparing responses and you'd like to chat with us about that, just to make sure as you're putting your package together, please reach out. We're happy to discuss those with you over the next couple weeks. Okay, so I don't see any more questions. Oh, sorry, I see it. We will post the recording of this session on the web as well. Are we going to post it, Dylan, or we're going to share it with attendees?
We're going to post it. And then Jonathan, there is another question that came up in the Q&A tab from an anonymous participant.
I'm not seeing that.
Yeah, I can read it. Can you elaborate on the timeline? I understand the deadline for the RFI is August 4th, but what happens after that? I also saw a deadline of 2028. I'm not clear what that means. That's a question.
I can speak to the 2028 deadline is the deadline to submit an adaptive reuse or to take advantage of the adaptive reuse program as defined in the planning code. There's a 5-year provision for this program that was intended to really incentivize projects to come forward. That again is separate from this RFI process.
In terms of next steps on this RFI, August 4th is the deadline, as Dylan mentioned. Depending on volume, we are going to have a sort of rolling, ability for folks to submit a little later than that. and just keep that window open. But for the initial responses, we are hoping that by the end of September, we'll be able to review all of those and follow up with individual projects if we have follow-up questions. So that's the tentative timeline.
And I'll just share, going back to the inclusionary point a moment ago, I put in the chat here a couple of links. These are actually the planning department's staff reports on both of those pieces, the impact fee reductions and modifications, as well as the inclusionary proposal, which gives a very helpful summary, I think, for those who don't want to wade through the legislative text to look at all the ins and outs of how this may apply to various projects, depending on when they come in. So please keep that in mind as you're doing your applications.
Okay, and with that, I think we just want to say thank you to everyone on the call. We really, is there another? Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
Monet
the
just asked to
website.
clarify what the RFI website, where this will be posted, and it's going to be on the main RFI web page, which Lily has
Lily
just put
posted.
right there in the chat. Yep. So that's where it'll be.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. And we look forward to hearing from you if you have additional questions. And we look forward to seeing responses. We hope that you do participate. And thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.